Hey, what's up? Hello, everybody. Alex Kapitko here. This is the Centered from Reality podcast. Today is Tuesday, November 9th, and there's a lot to talk about, so I decided to focus on a couple things that have just been happening over the last week. Hopefully, Thursday, maybe we'll get back to international stuff. Lots going on, anyways, but I hope your day's going well. And I just remember waking up over the weekend and seeing that the infrastructure bill passed. And honestly, I was like, what? I had to do a double check just to make sure I was actually not just seeing things because, Trump every week was infrastructure week, Biden every week has been infrastructure week, and it looks like they finally got their asses together and passed something. I will get to the bill later. I also want to talk a little bit about Astro World and the Travis Scott concert, or festival, I guess, that turned into a tragedy. But yeah, I want to talk about that, the infrastructure bill, the Republican reaction, of course. But I actually want to talk about Aaron Rodgers first. I want to start with that, just because, as a disclaimer, I'm a huge Packers fan. I have an Aaron Rodgers jersey. He's probably my favorite NFL player. And this week has been pretty hard for me, seeing all the news stories, but I feel like I do need to talk about it a little bit. I have checked my personal bias at the door. I've checked that away for now, and I'm going to try to just talk about it as openly as possible here because I do think it's getting ridiculous. But for those who don't really follow sports, Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback for the Green Bay Packers. He tested positive for COVID, I think it was last Tuesday. And then during that time, it also came out on Wednesday that he was unvaccinated. And at the first look of the story, one could say no big deal because the NFL never mandated vaccines. They just have strict rules for those who don't get vaccinated. But on a closer look, the story got more complex because I guess Rodgers, and I actually forget seeing this when it came out, but I guess Rodgers had told reporters back in August that he had been immunized. Immunized. And then he talked about how he didn't judge the people who wouldn't get the vaccine, and it was a personal choice. And it was kind of just a weird interview because first he said immunized, which I guess now we've learned has been code for something not the vaccine. But also he made it sound like he was vaccinated in the interview just because he talked about the other people who weren't and how he doesn't judge them. But it turns out that wasn't the case, and he'd been lying to kind of numerous parties, including the country, including to people like me who were big fans of him and like to speak up for him, and stick with him. But this was a hard one to do. It wasn't a good look because he lied, said he was immunized, and he was going through the entire NFL season basically not following all the rules that unvaccinated players had to follow. For example, there's times when I've seen clips of him not wearing a mask on the sidelines, and if you're unvaccinated, I guess you're required to wear a mask pretty much all the time, honestly. And he didn't. He had to wear a mask when traveling, and I guess he didn't do that all the time as well. And he was just close with other players who I guess could have thought he was vaccinated. Now the media makes it sound like he's lied to his entire team, blah, blah, blah. From what I've gathered, it sounds like everyone in Green Bay knew, or in the Green Bay organization knew. I'm assuming the coaches as well probably knew. So I don't know if I buy the argument that he was lying to his teammates. I'm sure they knew. But of course, by the end of last week, so like 3 or 4 days ago, this story was pretty fascinating because now there are questions, of what the Green Bay organization know, did the NFL know, and when did they know? I think this is going to probably end in a lot of finger pointing that could implicate even the league. I don't really know. Also, Rodgers has lost a lot of long-term sponsors. Even his State Farm commercials were toned it back a little bit. Like I still saw some, but it looks like they're playing less of those. I don't know. I do agree that it's a personal decision, but that being said, and that's a big but here that I'm going to add, Rodgers is a star quarterback for a team that has great playoff implications. Vaccinated players can come back from positive COVID tests in no time, right? They test positive, they need to wait a certain amount of time, and they can come back. But unvaccinated ones have to take a minimum of 10 days off, potentially more. Also, they could have long-term issues. That happened with Cam Newton, who came back after having COVID last year. and he still just did not play well for weeks because he just clearly was struggling from the side effects or long haul, I guess you could say. Rodgers' decision, it could impact the team at the end of the day and could lead to the season seeing a decline. They were 7-1, now they're 7-2. And the team looked like they were rolling towards a very successful postseason. And now he's jeopardized all that. He's the leader of a very good team. He's a public figure, and he's a role model to young people. And he shouldn't lie to the country and be so selfish. At the end of the day, it's selfish. He has the personal freedom to not get vaccinated. I'm not personally for vaccine mandates. I know I've said that, but I'll say it again. But there's repercussions, especially when you're a good team in the NFL and a public figure. Tom Brady's vaccinated, he's, from what I've gathered at least, a big Trump guy. And he's kind of a contrarian. I think someone that I honestly wouldn't be surprised if he said he wasn't vaccinated. But he is, because he saw the vaccination as something bigger than himself because he wants Tampa Bay to do well. And Rodgers didn't do that. He thought of himself. And the Packers had a big game 2 days ago on Sunday against the Chiefs, and they lost. Rodgers couldn't play. Jordan Love, the backup, didn't play well. And the team couldn't win when, if Rodgers was playing, they probably would have. And they honestly needed that win because their schedule is going to get tougher. But that was the decision that Rodgers made. And also the story gets even more irritating if it wasn't bad enough because I listened to the Pat McAfee show. He's, ex-NFL punter, MMA commentator, kind of just a real bro-y podcast. Fun, they have a lot of funny conversations, all that stuff. And Rodgers was on it last Thursday, I think it was. And it was entertaining, I'll say. But, man, Rodgers, I don't know. Rodgers goes on a lot, but on this episode, he kind of did the 3 C's, as I'm going to call them. He was contrarian, conspiratorial, and crazy. And it made me just go, what has happened to this guy? This is a guy that I thought was, fairly smart and a critical thinker. But let's just listen to a few clips I compiled here, just so you get an idea of how this went.
Thank you, buddy.
Good water drink. It's going to be
I realize I'm in the crosshairs of the woke mob right now. So before my final nail gets put in my cancel culture casket, I think I'd like to set the record straight on so many of the blatant lies that are out there about myself right now. And I appreciate the opportunity to tell my side of the story on here. First of all, I didn't lie in the initial press conference. During that time, it was a very, witch hunt that was going on across the league where everybody in the media was so concerned about who was vaccinated and who wasn't and what that meant and who was being selfish and who would talk about it and what it meant if they said it's a personal decision. They shouldn't have to disclose their own medical information and whatnot. And at the time, my plan was to say that I've been immunized. It wasn't some sort of ruse or lie, it was the truth. And I'll get into the whole immunization in a second. But had there been a follow-up to my statement that I've been immunized, I would have responded with this. I would have said, look, I'm not, some sort of anti-vax flat earther. I am somebody who's a critical thinker. You guys know me. I march to the beat of my own drum. But one in particular stood out when I knew I was not going to win this. I had a meeting, and they said, one of the main docs said, it's impossible for a vaccinated person to get COVID or spread COVID. And at that point, I knew that, I was definitely not going to win the appeal. And it was very shortly thereafter that denied, which we know now that information is totally false that was given to me. My desire to immunize myself was what was best for my body, and that's why this is so important to me. My medical team advised me that the danger I'd be in to get of an adverse event was greater than the risk of getting COVID and recovering.
I'll stop there because he talks for a lot more. It's quite a diatribe. But he goes on to talk about how the organization and teammates knew. I don't know what to believe anymore. He doesn't seem like the most trustworthy guy. But that could backfire. It sounds like he's kind of pointing fingers. Lots going on. This is probably just a shit show for the Green Bay organization and the NFL, honestly. You know it's bad when SNL, CNN, and all the political podcasts I listen to are talking about this because it means that it's a media storm for the NFL. But anyways, Rodgers goes on to talk about how he's taking ivermectin. He consulted with Joe Rogan, who I, on a personal level, love his podcast, don't love his vaccine views, and no one should be taking vaccine advice from Joe Rogan. He's a smart guy in other fields, but he's not a doctor, he's not a virologist, none of that. A couple thoughts here just on this, though. I don't think the woke mob is after Rodgers. The NFL just wants to cover their asses and keep games going. Trump got vaccinated. Brady got vaccinated. Lindsey Graham got vaccinated. Are they the woke mob? Most people on Fox News are vaccinated. They have a stricter, vaccine mandate than the country does right now. They're all, I'm assuming, vaccinated if they want to stay there. So is it the woke mob, or is Rodgers just going all in on the contrarianism? It's just crazy to me. At first, I thought the actress and his wife, Shailene Woodley, who's been in stuff like The Descendants and The Big Now or something like that. I don't even know, but she's all right. I at first, though, thought that maybe Woodley had influenced Rodgers because she's, I guess, pregnant or trying to have kids. I missed that. And so she doesn't want to get the vaccine, and she's kind of one of these holistic medicine people. I guess you could say more kind of hippy-dippy in terms of her medical views. And, she's pregnant and questions the vaccine. And honestly, I think that's fine. I could understand if you're pregnant why you might not want to get vaccinated. So I was thinking maybe that rubbed up on Rodgers. Maybe there's some truth there. But I think that the pandemic and the vaccine development have kind of brought to light an issue. And it's an issue that I've kind of seen time and time again here. And I think Rodgers' case over the last week highlights this perfectly. I've seen people on CNN and on SNL who call Rodgers dumb because he consulted with Joe Rogan. I don't think they know anything about Rodgers until this week. I don't think he's dumb at all. He's quite an articulate guy. Went to Berkeley, obviously to play football, but he's always been well-spoken. He's no right-winger by... he spoke out a lot during the BLM stuff in favor of, reform and systematic racism issues. So I don't think he's some right winger. He sounds like he's just kind of gone conspiratorial and he's done his own research, that stuff. And that's why I think what we've seen during this pandemic is what Sam Harris has called a contagion of bad ideas. Basically, it's kind of the idea that a lot of highly smart people have been infected by this kind of contrarian stance on the vaccine. It's led them to question almost everything and kind of build this house of cards around them with these fake theories. And if one theory collapses, there's others. And it's just this strange contrarian rabbit hole. You just ask questions about everything, even if you're not trying to prove the questions. And it's just, like Sam Harris had said, a contagion of bad ideas. It seems like a lot of smart people that are critical thinkers and already maybe individualists have just taken this like bullheaded contrarian stance. They've gone down a rabbit hole in a lot of ways. A few months ago, Sam Harris, who I think is a great podcaster, by the way, whether you like him or not, I know he's been controversial at times, but he had a great podcast called Contagion of Bad Ideas, like I said, and it's a conversation with Eric Topol. Eric Topol is a smart guy. He's a founder and director of Scripps Research Translational Institute, professor of molecular medicine, and an executive vice president of Scripps Research. And in the episode, they just talk about vaccine hesitancy and the related misinformation, mainly looking at, the political siloing of ideas, the political divisions around the vaccine. It's really a good conversation. I encourage people to check it out. But it goes into how people like Brett Weinstein, for example, who's an evolutionary biologist, smart guy, usually pro-vaccine, has kind of he's kind of gone down a rabbit hole of digging up half-baked theories, half-baked studies. He was a big touter of ivermectin early, and he just seems to almost be so contrarian, and he likes to call out all these mysterious, clandestine parts of our world that he's so focused on being contrarian that he can't see the forest through the trees. And so Sam Harris talks about that a lot. He talks about how contrarianism seems to be important than facts or science. And he also does a good job of explaining how difficult, and I think this is the key part here, he does a good job of explaining how difficult it can be to argue with someone who is on this anti-vax side, or maybe also someone that believes the election was stolen. He explains how many of these anti-vaxxers or election people or QAnon people will have, 7 or 8 worries or theories about the issue with the vaccine. Maybe one will be that it was made too quickly, record time. Another that it causes myocarditis, which it does, but it's very tiny. Maybe another is that it was rushed to be approved. Maybe another is that there are a lot of reported deaths in that VAERS system. Maybe, there's a microchip, so on. And Harris points out very well, I think it's the best part of this podcast, is that you may be able to have a conversation with one of these people and disprove 2 of their points or 3 of their points. But if you can't explain or disprove all of the 7 or 8 that they have, the anti-vaxxer will say, see, they're in on this, or see, you can't prove all of this. So it's kind of like whoever's trying to disprove these conspiracy theories, they're always facing an uphill battle because there's just a list of ideas that are more contrarian and hard to disprove than anything. And I think that is really the issue. And in this Rodgers interview, we kind of see him discuss how he was worried about how quickly it was released. He was worried about the side effects. He thought it could hurt his fertility. The woke mob is after him. And it gets exhausting, and you have to keep almost taking notes with everything he says so you can disprove each one. And if you don't disprove each one, then they're going to call you part of the establishment or an elite or a cabal or whatever, And so even if Pat McAfee, who I don't think was suited to have this argument, but even if Pat McAfee were to argue with him, if he didn't prove all of them, then it just wouldn't work. And the last thing I'll add on that, because I do think this is a serious problem here, is that we just clearly have a society that is just almost built on straw man arguments and contrarianism, nihilism, conspiratorial thinking, and it seems like Rodgers has kind of fallen for it too here. The last thing I'll add, though, is there's a good Atlantic article by Jamel Hill called Why Aaron Rodgers Felt Free to Mislead People. And the article mentions how there were stars, like Kirk Cousins, Kyrie Irving, who won't get vaccinated. And, they've been, especially Kyrie Irving's been all over the media getting criticized, but at least he's been transparent. Same with Kirk Cousins. I think Carson Wentz as well. And Hill mentions that the NFL has tried to be a symbol of COVID safety, kind of like I mentioned earlier. And this whole Rodgers thing is going to hurt their image. The article says here in quotes, the situation raises the obvious question of whether other teams have been covering for unvaccinated key players. The article also mentions that, in quotes, Rodgers' use of the word immunized instead of vaccinated should have raised more eyebrows than it did at the time. In retrospect, his disingenuous comments hint at a specific kind of self-centeredness. He seemed to believe he was smarter than everyone else in the room. And guys, that goes back to what I said earlier. These smart contrarians have seemed to enjoy being in this niche world of just asking questions and more. And it just builds this weird house of cards. Anyways, let me know your thoughts on this one. I'm torn on it, honestly. I want Rodgers back. I think he's a great QB. But he honestly looks like an ass right now. And he does need to be held accountable. I've enjoyed having the NFL back. And if we want to have nice things during this strange time, people need to play by the rules and be accountable. If you're not going to be vaccinated, don't get vaccinated. But as a quarterback, there's only 2 or 3 of you on the field, and usually you carry the team. So they need you. So maybe do one for the team.